Okay, here we go.
All right. Good evening, everyone. This is John Taft with the Mack R. Happy 2025, folks. This is going to be the beginning of the year with this truck. So we're going to start with our first destination, and we'll see if when we get to the Tower General on the left. So, and I got to turn to the left, and then turn left and open the door. So
Keep left, and then turn left. Turn left.
all right, so we're going to start with Colorado Springs for waste paper, and this should be the 1,100 miles right to that Office Depot, and all that. So let's go get that waste paper slowly, and we'll get started. We'll start driving.
Let's do this.
Russia has never attacked a NATO country. By the way, NATO has never attacked Russia or the Soviet Union, so that should be reassuring to the Russians. And that's why I think NATO membership guarantees that there will be enduring peace, and not just peace for a couple more years, followed by another invasion down the road by Russia.
Would giving Vladimir Putin control over land that he seized set a bad precedent, right? Like, what would stop him from invading yet another country to reach a similar deal to what you're proposing?
I agree. I think it's a really bad precedent. It's a very tragic one. And unlike, say, the division of West Germany and East Germany, I tragically predict
Turn
that
left.
he will Russify those territories that he's occupying, so that, over time they will feel like they're part of Russia, not a separate country like East Germany was. So I think it's a really dangerous precedent. I just think my proposal is better than all the alternatives.
What about President Zelensky? You write in your piece that a majority of the Ukrainians still believe the country can win the war. Why should he support a plan that would give over land to Russia, especially if, his people, the public, thinks that they can win?
This would be the most difficult decision of his time as president. It would be unpopular. It would be especially unpopular within the military ranks. People that are fighting not just for independence and not just for Ukraine, but fighting to avenge their sisters and brothers that were killed by these Russians, and they won't like this deal. And that's why, if you're serious about ending the war, I'm going to take him at his word that President-elect Trump is serious about the war. You have to give something to the Ukrainian people for the sacrifice that they will be enduring. A deal has to be compromised on all sides. I actually was just reading The Art of the Deal earlier this morning by Mr. Trump, and he talks about that. It can't just be capitulation to Putin.
We started this conversation with you saying you're proposing this deal in tragedy, I think those are your words, or in sorrow. In sorrow,
yeah. I had a hard time publishing this piece because I don't like it.
When did reality sort of settle in for you? When did you think, like, okay, you've been very public supporting Ukraine throughout, this war. When did you realize it was time for a deal such as this?
Well, I talk to Ukrainians every single day. Those that travel to the battlefield, front line, those that are fighting, senior government officials. And I think over the last several months, it's a reality inside Ukraine, it's not my reality, that the costs of trying to go fight all the way to the 1991 borders is going to be heavy. And then number two, the event was the re-election of Donald Trump. And that in Kiev and in other parts of Ukraine, a sense has been building that they're not going to be able to rely on the United States for years and years.
That was former U.S. Ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul, speaking with NPR's Andrew Limbach.
If you like sour cherry, pucker up. It's one of the foods and flavors predicted to be trendy in 2025. NPR's Neda Ulubi reports.
Industry groups, famous chefs, and trend watchers have picked sour cherry, pistachio, and briny flavors as hot for 2025. And when it comes to eating out, expect to see mucho masa.
Masa is present all across the menu.
Conrado Rivera runs a popular food stall in Los Angeles called Comal with his wife. Recently, it was named one of LA's most exciting new restaurants by the website Eater. Masa is ground corn dough, the basis of corn tortillas and tamales. It's treated with an alkaline agent like lime in a process called nixtamalization. Comal is just one of many acclaimed masa-focused restaurants now open around the country. On TikTok, people gleefully document meals at Tatemo in Houston that just got a Michelin star. And these artisanal restaurants like Comal, Conrado Rivera and his wife, Chef Fatima Juarez, make masa from heirloom corn they buy exclusively from small family farmers.
¿De dónde viene la masa? Where the masa comes from. Some of the varieties come from Puebla or Oaxaca or Yucatan.
And it comes in a rainbow of colors.
Blue, yellow, pink, white, brown, red.
Food and Wine magazine is one of the places that says masa is having a moment. I asked the owners of Comal if they found it slightly silly or strange to label an ancient culinary staple a trend.
So I would love being part of it. We are happy to promote it worldwide.
And hopefully, Conrado Rivera says, the intention will help preserve strains of corn that support fragile ecosystems and introduce more North Americans to the greatness of fresh and fluffy masa, a trendy food for 2025 and for
announced from the station. And from C3 AI, C3 Generative AI works to enable rapid access to traceable, hallucination-free insights from enterprises using any LLM, helping turn the invisible into the obvious. This is Enterprise AI. From Procter & Gamble, maker of ZQuil, with a range of products designed to relieve occasional sleeplessness to help people fall asleep. Learn more at ZQuil.com. From Dignity Memorial, helping families protect their loved ones and gain peace of mind by planning cremations and funerals in advance. Dedicated to professionalism and compassion in every detail. More at dignitymemorial.com. And from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation at macfound.org.
And before 6 on the evening before Friday, and it's all things considered here on your NPR station, News 87. And on the freeways, it looks like they have cleared the problem heading out on Baytown East Freeway. That's eastbound I-10. It was before McCarty, and it taken up a couple of left lanes. You're going to be especially slow from downtown to the East Loop. Heading in on the Katy, eastbound I-10, still have the wreck before West Green. It's taking up 2 left main lanes in the Diamond Lane into set from around 99. And a couple of our earlier wrecks still with us, westbound 290 at Skinner and southbound 45 at Rainford Sawdust. Between now and sunrise at 7:15, we'll keep with some patchy showers and some patchy fog as well, low around 54, and mostly sunny tomorrow, with high near 67, just slightly above the average of 63. By now at 60 here at your NPR station, KUHF Houston, News 88.7 service of the University of Houston at 6 o'clock.
Congress is back in session tomorrow. Step 1 of shifting full control in Washington to the GOP.
We'll look at what's to come under new Republican leadership on the Hill and at the White House.
Today is Thursday, January 2nd, and this is All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Mary Louise Kelly.
And I'm Elsa Chang. Ahead this hour, incoming President Trump and his advisors have tariffs on their minds.
Trump says they will jumpstart the U.S. economy. Economic historians disagree.
Our bottom line is that tariffs did not make American manufacturing great, and they have the obvious impact of being bad for consumers.
Plus, bats. They are known to migrate long distances.
Which sounds exhausting, but one species uses Mother Nature for support.
A lot of bats are actually migrating before storms come through. And bats typically try to ride this storm front.
First, this news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Jack Speer. Congress returns tomorrow with Republicans holding narrow majorities in both houses. That could complicate President-elect Donald Trump's plans to pursue an ambitious legislative agenda. More from NPR's Lexi Shapiro.
The first order of business in the House will be electing a new speaker. While incoming Speaker Mike Johnson has Trump's endorsement, just a few Republican defectors could derail the voting process. If the House hasn't chosen a speaker by Monday, that could delay the certification of Trump's 2024 presidential victory. Trump's legislative priorities will likely include passing a border security package and extending the tax cuts Republicans passed during his first term. Those are set to expire this year. Lawmakers will also need to fund the government by March to avoid a shutdown. And the Senate will soon begin confirmation hearings for Trump's cabinet picks, some of whom have yet to secure the support they'll need. Lexi Shapiro, NPR News, Washington.
Officials now say the man who detonated a rented Tesla Cybertruck packed with explosives in front of President-elect Donald Trump's Las Vegas hotel apparently shot himself in the head before the vehicle burst into flames. Sheriff's Department officials identified the man as 37-year-old Master Sergeant Matthew Allen Livelsberg. 7 people were injured. Officials say there does not appear to be a connection to an incident in New Orleans where a former soldier drove a truck into a crowd of New Year's revelers, killing 14 people. Meanwhile, more than 24 hours after the attack in New Orleans, parts of Bourbon Street began reopening today. Among those returning, street musicians and artists like Eoline Broomfield, who says she hopes her work helps the community heal.
I just want things to be normal, even though I know it's not normal. So I like playing out here just so I can feel a little bit normal.
Driver of the pickup that plowed into New Year's revelers, identified as 42-year-old Shamsuddin Jabbar, appears to have been inspired by the Islamic State. Jabbar was shot and killed by police. Palestinian authorities have suspended the news outlet Al Jazeera from broadcasting in the Israeli-occupied West Bank. NPR's Emily Fang has more.
First, Israel banned Al Jazeera for its coverage of Israel's war in Gaza. Now, Palestinian authorities in the West Bank are shutting down the Qatari-funded network. The Palestinian Authority, or PA, which governs much of the West Bank, says Al Jazeera's coverage constitutes hate speech and posed a, quote, threat to Palestinian social cohesion. The PA has been battling Palestinian militants inside the sprawling refugee camp in Jenin in the West Bank. The rare operation by PA security forces there have divided Palestinians, and Al Jazeera has covered the clashes in the camp as well as protests for and against the PA. The PA has called Al Jazeera's coverage hate speech. Al Jazeera said in a statement that it, quote, deplores the Palestinian Authority's actions. Emily Fang, NPR News, Ramallah.
On the first trading day of the new year, the Dow was down 151 points. This is
live from News 88.7 in Houston. I'm Matt Thomas. A primarily Muslim community on the northwest side of Houston is fearing backlash after their neighbor allegedly drove into a crowd of pedestrians in New Orleans. Authorities began searching the home of Shamsuddin Jabbar last night. One neighbor who lives on the same property as Jabbar and requested he remain anonymous says he's worried about potential backlash.
We don't feel comfortable after that what happened. How the people look at people who practice their religion, even though with a radical.
Jabbar allegedly killed 14 people and injured dozens more. Turo is an app that's the focus of two major events to start 2025. News 88.7's Gabrielle Dawkins has the latest on how this company was used to enact a plan of deadly destruction.
Turo released a statement confirming that both the Cybertruck that exploded outside of the Trump Hotel in Las Vegas and the truck that ran into a crowd of bystanders along Bourbon Street in New Orleans was rented via Turo. Turo is a peer-to-peer car-sharing marketplace where people can rent a vehicle with a few clicks. Turo stated that they are not aware of any information that indicates the two incidents are related, and they are working with authorities. Neither of the renters, according to Turo, posed a security threat. I'm Gabrielle Dawkins, News 88.7.
Houston's new 621 area code is set to launch later this month.
Houstonians will start getting numbers with 621 area codes starting January 23rd. The new area code was approved last October by the Public Utility Commission of Texas in order to accommodate continued population growth. It was previously said that the city would run out of new phone numbers by 2025. The 621 area code is estimated to last the Houston area for the next 9 years. This will be Houston's 5th area code and the first new one since 2013. I'm Gwyneth Mossbeck, News 88.7.
Patchy fog in the morning, partly sunny by afternoon, highs in the upper 60s. I'm Matt Thomas, News 88.7.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, supporting creative people and effective institutions committed to building a more just, verdant, and peaceful world. More information is at macfound.org.
From NPR News, this is All Things Considered. I'm Elsa Chang in Culver City, California.
And I'm Mary Louise Kelly in Washington, where Congress begins a new session tomorrow. That's the first step in shifting full control in Washington to the GOP. President-elect Donald Trump is calling on his party to stay on the same page despite tight margins and threats of intra-party fighting. Joining me now is NPR congressional correspondent Claudia Grisales. Hi, Claudia.
Hey there.
Okay, so Trump's demand for Republicans, stay united, stay on the same page. What is that page? What's the to-do list for this incoming Congress?
Right. It is quite the page. There is plenty on it. They have some big tasks on their housekeeping list this year. That is, address the U.S. debt limit that will be hit in the coming months and keep the government's lights on after a stopgap spending plan expires in March. But even sooner than all that, they want to attend to some partisan priorities that were part of their campaign pledges, namely legislation to address the U.S.-Mexico border, curtailing immigration, as well as extending a tax package from President-elect Donald Trump's last term that is set to expire this year. But first, Republicans need to elect leaders in each of these chambers before they can get started on any of this work.
Right, and stay with what those elections of leaders are going to look like, because we know on the Senate side, we know how this is going to land. South Dakota Republican John Thune is expected to easily take over as the new majority leader. On the House side, Louisiana Republican Mike Johnson would like to continue as Speaker. That looks a little more complex.
Yes, very complex. He faces pretty much an uphill battle at this stage. He was elected to the role about 14 months ago. This was after a tumultuous few months when House Speaker Kevin McCarthy was ousted from the job and several other GOP candidates lost their bids to replace him. So House Republicans had a bigger margin in all of that, and this year it's down to one GOP member who can wreak havoc.
Well, that's the thing. Republicans controlled the House by a big margin, as you said, but they were constantly fighting in the last Congress. Does that give us any window into how this new Congress may function or dysfunction?
Yes, we think it does. We saw Johnson struggle to pass even partisan plans in the last term, and some in his own party would just not get on board for various reasons. And often we saw Democrats bailing him out with bipartisan proposals instead. So with job one for the House tomorrow to elect a new speaker, he's already facing this opposition, and there will be no House business until this gets done. No members will be sworn in, no legislative business, and we already heard from House Republicans at the end of last year who were not so sure they would vote to re-elect Johnson to the speakership. They may stick with this opposition even with President-elect Donald Trump's recent endorsement.
Remind us what the process will actually look like to elect a new House Speaker, whoever it may be.
Right. A new House Speaker will need a simple majority of the 435-member House. So the magic number is 218 votes. Republicans have just 219 members. So not much breathing room at all, especially since Democrats are not expected to help Johnson or any other Republican get over the line. And we know already Kentucky Republican Thomas Massey's been pretty vocal. He will vote against Johnson. That could open the floodgates for other House Republicans to join him. And some Republicans will use this time for attention in the media. Some are unhappy with Johnson's speakership during this last session, or some may look at this as an opportunity to make a favorable deal for themselves. For example, keep rules that would make it easy for them to kick Johnson out as Speaker later, whoever is elected. And that's something Johnson wants to also change this year.
And PR congressional correspondent Claudia Rosales, thank you.
Thank you.
It's a new year, but President-elect Donald Trump is sticking to his old message about tariffs. He likes them. In a social media post this week, Trump touted tariffs as a way to create, quote, vast wealth for the country. And he pointed to the experience of the Gilded Age in the late 19th century. But researchers who have studied that period say the economy thrived in spite of high tariffs, not because of them. We're going to dig a little bit deeper into that bit of history now with NPR's Scott Worsley. Hey, Scott.
Hi, Allison.
Okay, so what was going on with tariffs in the Gilded Age?
Tariffs were high, and they were a big source of overall government revenue back in the late 19th century. Remember, we did not yet have an income tax in those days, so tariffs accounted for 50 to 60% of all the money the federal government brought in. Wow. Economic historians Christopher Meisner and Alexander Klein wrote a recent paper about Gilded Age tariffs from 1870 to about 1910. And Meisner, who's at UC Davis, recalls that was a transformative period for the United States as we shifted from a farm economy that primarily supplied raw materials to the rest of the world to the industrial force we would become known for in the 20th century.
We started the period exporting wheat, corn, and a lot of cotton. And by the end of the period, the United States is a global manufacturing powerhouse.
On a social media post on New Year's Day, Trump argued that tariffs were key to that economic development. Of course, he wants to impose steep new tariffs once he's back in the White House, while at the same time cutting the income tax, which is the government's biggest source of revenue today.
Wait, so what do economists say about all this? Like, how important were tariffs to that Gilded Age transformation or to our own economic progress these days?
Well, this is a source of some debate, going all the way back to Alexander Hamilton, who argued that tariffs helped to foster U.S. industry by discouraging foreign competition. When Meisner and his co-author looked at the late 19th century, though, they found just the opposite. The industries that had the highest tariffs during the Gilded Age, thus the least competition, tended to kind of get fat and lazy. They were not as productive or as innovative as industries with less tariff protection. So Meisner says tariffs are not the magic elixir that Trump would have us believe.
Our bottom line is that tariffs did not make American manufacturing great. Tariffs don't tend to promote productivity, nor do they promote economic growth, and they have the obvious impact of being bad for consumers by raising prices.
And that effect on prices is just as true in our own time. You know, Trump likes to say it's foreign companies that pay tariffs, but we know from experience in his first term, most of the cost is borne by businesses and customers right here in the United States.
Exactly. Well, Scott, if tariffs didn't actually help the economy in the 19th century, why did they stick around?
Well, they did bring in a lot of money for the government, and Meisner says industries that were successful in getting protection from foreign competition were often reluctant to give that up.
Lobbying was an important part of the story as far as we can tell. Stronger industries are able to get the attention of Congress, and they use tariffs to their advantage to monopolize or get closer to monopolizing their own industries.
You know, anytime the government puts its thumb on the scale with tariffs, there's an incentive for businesses to either seek higher levies or alternatively carve-outs from the import taxes. We certainly saw that during Trump's first term in office. For most of the 20th century, the U.S. moved away from tariffs and tried to promote freer trade. But over the last couple of administrations, we've seen that turn around, and now the president-elect is promising a new era of tariffs reminiscent of that Gilded Age.
That is NPR's Scott Horsley. Thank you so much, Scott.
You're welcome.
Animals burn a lot of energy during long-distance migrations. New research in the journal Science suggests that some bats make their journeys a bit easier by getting a lift. NPR's Jonathan Lambert has more.
Bat migration is a bit of a black box. Unlike many birds and other migratory species, bats only fly under cover of darkness. And that's made them harder to study, says biologist Edward Hermy.
So they're fast and they move at night. And once they disappear from an area, we don't necessarily have the ability to figure out where they show up somewhere else.
To overcome these challenges, they needed a way to track the bats. While GPS tags have helped researchers follow bird migration, bats are pretty small, so traditional tags don't quite work.
To have something that can remotely send data about an animal and be small enough for a bat is really hard to come by.
So Hermy and his colleagues at the Max Planck Institute of Animal Behavior in Germany got creative. They study a species called the nocturnal bat that migrates across Central Europe, traveling northeast from around Switzerland towards Poland in the spring. To track their migration, they designed special tags small enough to fit on the bat's back, sort of like a little backpack.
So the tags are really cool. They have multiple sensors on them, so they can record temperature and acceleration. And they don't actually have a GPS on them at all.
Instead, the tag connects to a wireless network, sort of like how a cell phone does. That allows the researchers to track their migrations in unprecedented detail. They followed over 70 bats and got some pretty surprising results.
We found that a lot of bats are actually migrating before storms come through. And this will generate some strong winds that are typically blowing in the right direction for migration. And bats typically try to ride this storm front.
In other words, the bats are timing their departure to leave just before a storm comes through. Deciding to leave right when these winds arrive can save bats a lot of energy on their journeys, which can span nearly 1,000 miles.
So sometimes they can ride it for 1 or 2 nights, but usually the storm keeps moving during the day. And so while the bats are sleeping, the storm keeps going, and then they have to wait for the next good opportunity to migrate.
Waiting too long for the perfect winds has a cost too. Female nocturnal bats are usually pregnant this time of year, and the longer they wait, the heavier their little bat bun in the oven will be, which could weigh them down.
It's kind of a gamble when and where to migrate.
But more fully understanding the bats' journeys could ultimately help their conservation. Wind turbines, for instance, can kill a lot of bats, and Hermy hopes this work might help researchers develop migration forecasts that energy companies could use to minimize harm to these nighttime flyers. Jonathan Lambert, NPR News.
On Thursday evening here on your NPR station, News 88.7. 60 Fahrenheit, 16 Celsius. Two left main lanes there for a while. We'll take a while to recover from 99 Grand Parkway. And at last check, still have the wreck westbound 290 and Skipper.
There's more to the story at HoustonPublicMedia.org. From in-depth coverage of issues affecting all Texans to informing you about the latest breaking news, we prioritize exceptional reporting that's always available on your favorite device. Join us daily for political news that puts substance over sensationalism and community news that shines a light on voices across Houston and beyond. Anytime, anywhere, there's always more to the story at HoustonPublicMedia.org.
Former President Jimmy Carter has died.
You know, I've had a wonderful life. I've had thousands of friends, and I've had an exciting, adventurous, and gratifying existence.
Join us for a special report looking back at the life and presidency of James Earl Carter.
And we'll have that for you Sunday evening at 10 o'clock here on News 88.7.
Support comes from the City of Houston Solid Waste Management Department, closed Wednesday for New Year's Day. All collection services will maintain their regular schedule, except curbside bulk waste collections, which will be delayed this week. More at HoustonSolidWaste.org. Support comes from the Grand 1894 Opera House, presenting Marvelous, an evening with Marilyn May, the singer who has been entertaining audiences for over 8 decades. Saturday, January 4th at 8 p.m. More at thegrand.com.
Naming a new baby or a pet isn't always easy, but how about naming a company? A look at the high-stakes name game next time on Marketplace.
Coming your way in 10 minutes at 6:20.
Support for NPR comes from the station and from the George Gund Foundation, working to make Cleveland more vibrant, sustainable, and just, and setting an example for the nation. More information available at gundfoundation.org. From the Doris Duke Foundation, which aims to support the well-being of people and the planet for a more creative, equitable, and sustainable future. And from the William T. Grant Foundation, supporting research to improve the lives of young people at WTGrantFDN.org.
From NPR News, this is All Things Considered. I'm Elsa Chang.
And I'm Mary Louise Kelly. The central character of Jane Courtney Sullivan's The Cliffs is a house, an old Victorian house, which sits high above the sea in Maine. But like so much of Sullivan's work, the heart of this multi-generational story is women, and how often their stories are discarded or lost. If the central character of The Cliffs is a house, the protagonist is Harvard archivist Jane Flanagan. Jane returns to her hometown, site of the house in question, after an episode at a work party that has led to her being put on leave from her job and from her marriage. In an effort to fill her days, she begins documenting the history of the house for the new owner, and it is through telling these stories of the generations of women who lived there that Jane manages to begin to understand her own story. Jane Courtney Sullivan joins me now. Welcome back to All Things Considered.
Thank you so much for having me.
This Victorian house in your book was inspired by a real house that you saw. Tell me about it.
It was. So probably 10 summers ago now, my husband and I were in southern Maine on vacation with our dear friend just the women who had lived there over many, many centuries.
Well, and you've kind of just mapped out the opening pages where your character, your fictional character, Jane, has the same experience it sounds like you did. Spots this big purple house, abandoned yet fully furnished, on a cliff. Tell us how her relationship with that house.
Yeah, so Jane, as an adult, she is an archivist and she has her dream job, which is at the Schlesinger Library at Harvard. And the Schlesinger is this magical place that chronicles the lives of American women. And I discovered it when I was writing my novel, The Engagements. I went there and did research on one of my characters. And from then on, I thought, I really want to incorporate this place into a novel because it is so in sync with what I write about, which is this idea that the moment a woman is born will determine so much of who she's allowed to become. And Jane herself is really preoccupied with that. She's very intelligent. She comes from a family of women, very strong women and very strong-willed women. And she doesn't see the goodness in her family necessarily when she's in high school, when she's a teenager and first discovering this house. And the house is her hideaway from all of that. And she really kind of just goes there to read and be alone. But coming back to her hometown 20 years later, having made her own colossal mistake, she sees it all sort of in a different light, including the house.
She goes all the way back to the 1600s. And among the things she unearths are the stories of all the women who have lived on this land and in this house. Do they have anything in common? All these generations of women going all the way up to Jane?
Oh my goodness, it's so funny because I feel like they really do. And I love that these women through time, for the most part, never meet one another. But I do envision them as being sort of in conversation with one another. For example, one of the women, Eliza, is raised as a Shaker at Sabbath Day Lake Shaker Village in Maine, which still exists. Eliza grows up there when it's much more robust, and there's also an indigenous woman, Kanji, who is the first woman on that land in the book. And at some point I just started looking around in my research, did the indigenous Abenaki people in Maine ever cross paths with the Shakers? And they did. There was a famous winter market at Poland Springs, and these were two groups who came and sold baskets. And so I was able to kind of imagine what it would be like for Eliza, who is a Shaker, who other people are looking at thinking, oh, they're sort of unusual, to see these Native American people and wonder what they might have in common.
I'm listening to you and I'm thinking it's so delightful, the stories of women interweaving. You're telling me about what Jane discovered as she went back through history, and you're doing the same thing as the author and creator of all this, going back through the history and figuring out the stories of women that were told and not told.
That's right. Before I was lucky enough to start writing fiction full-time, I was a researcher at the New York Times, and I loved that job, but I always imagined it would be so dreamy to just not have to do research anymore and just write fiction. And what I found immediately was I love doing research. It's my favorite part of the process, and sort of unearthing stories that may have been forgotten or may just not be known because there are so many stories. So to sort of pluck one out and tell it again, I feel like is so important.
I asked you what these generations of fictional women in your novel share in common. Do you share something in common with them, Jake or Lisa?
Oh my goodness, so many things. Every one of the women in the book deals with things that most women deal with. So whether you're talking about an indigenous woman who is living her life when colonists first make contact with what becomes New England, or you're talking about Marilyn, who is an artist in the early 1960s and trying to sort of navigate what that looks like while also being a mother. Yes, they each live in a certain moment in time, but they all think a lot about motherhood and about love
That's the author, J. Courtney Sullivan. Her gorgeous novel is The Cliffs. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
At 6:29, you've been listening to all things considered on your NPR station, News 88.7. Marketplace is
Support comes from Apollo Chamber Players, Chamber Music America's 2025 Ensemble of the Year, presenting Opportunity with the Houston Ballet Dancers, the second concert of its We the People season, Saturday, January 4th, 7 p.m. at Manch. ApolloChamberPlayers.org.
The transition back to normal work and school schedules after the holidays can really mess with our sleep patterns. Sleep expert Dr. Sudha Talabajula talk that over and answer your questions, which you can send now to talk@HoustonMatters.org on the next Houston Matters.
Tomorrow morning at 9.
Donations come in many forms: a monthly membership, a one-time gift, and that extra vehicle you no longer need. We take any kind of vehicle in any condition. Learn more at HoustonPublicMedia.org/cars. And thank you.
on the road. It's got to right north Sam eastbound direction right before the East Tex Freeway and installing your way 45 southbound right after Woodlands Parkway at 6:30.
Marketplace is supported by ADP Research, committed to making the world of work more productive through data-driven discovery. Learn more at adpresearch.com.
On today's show, it's a shiny, sparkly, brand new year. But the themes of the economy, they're everlasting. From American Public Media, this is Marketplace.
Marketplace is supported by Babbel for Business. Babbel's professional language learning platform offers practical and industry-specific language courses designed for faster, better learning and a more culturally inclusive workforce. Learn more at babbelforbusiness.com. And by Revenued, providing working capital for businesses whose cash flow is holding them back. Revenued approves businesses based on revenue, not credit, with funds approved and available in a day. More at getrevenued.com.
In New York, I'm Kristen Schwab in for Kai Risdall. It's Thursday, January 2nd. Thanks for tuning in. We have finally moved into the new year, but when it comes to the economy, we're still gathering intel on 2024. Today's data dump is construction spending from November. The figures from the Commerce Department Census Bureau take in everything from home building to putting up new power plants, hospitals, and schools. Also, the repairs and rebuilding of public infrastructure like highways, ports, and water treatment plants. In November, spending was flat from October and up 3% from the year before. Numbers that are lower than what economists expected. But as Marketplace's Mitchell Hartman reports, there are pockets of strong construction growth.
Nearly half of all construction in this country is residential. Single-family home building has held up well, with spending up about 8% year-to-date through November. Multifamily construction, though, is down nearly 6%. Demand for rental units is strong, but builders are deterred by high interest rates, says Gary Schlossberg at the Wells Fargo Investment Institute.
And we do expect to see rental inflation picking up this year.
Meanwhile, home renovation is booming, says Ken Simonson at Associated General Contractors of America.
Homeowners have a lot of discretionary income, and they are putting some of that into fixing up their existing homes.
In non-residential construction, the big story is a surge in manufacturing, up by double digits year over year.
1 out of 5 total non-residential dollars is going into giant manufacturing plants producing semiconductors, electric vehicles, and batteries.
A lot of that is driven by billions of dollars in federal spending from the Inflation Reduction and CHIPS
University of Maryland.
So the handling is pretty straightforward. The ships are pretty straightforward in terms of how they hold the containers. Very easy to automate that process.
That's happening at some ports in the U.S., but especially in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, says Margaret Kidd, who studies supply chain technology at the University of Houston. Go to the most automated ports in Europe, she says.
You don't see people. People are in the background. They're in offices. They're in safer locations to execute their work.
And robots are operating cranes to move containers around. That can make ports safer for the humans who are still around, Kidd says, since they don't have to be near heavy equipment. But it's not entirely clear that automation actually makes ports more productive or efficient. Phil Evers at the University of Maryland says that's in part because the work that needs to get done doesn't change.
You know, a crane can only operate so fast safely, whether there's a human running it or whether it's automated.
What automation can lower, he says, are labor costs, as in not having to employ as many workers, which is what the Longshoremen's Union is worried about. Daniel Flaming, president of the Economic Roundtable, argues human workers should stick around ports because despite those standard containers, glitches and anomalies are inevitable.
Ships that are coming in through rough seas may have containers that aren't as well aligned as they should be. There may be damaged containers.
And people, he says, are better than robots at catching and fixing those kinds of problems. I'm Henry Epp for Marketplace.
But
West Coast. It's incredibly remote and rugged, so when you're in there, you get that sense of true adventure.
But if the river isn't runnable or fun for tourists, they might take their money somewhere else. In Irwin, Tennessee, I'm Katie Mines for Marketplace.
Coming up.
So I think of it as a bit of a Tetris exercise or a Rubik's Cube.
Tricky problems demand thoughtful solutions. But first, let's do the numbers. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 151 points, almost 0.4%, to finish at 42,392. The Nasdaq subtracted 30 points, almost 0.2%, to close at 19,280. And the S&P 500 lost 13 points, 0.2%, to end at 5868. The number of vehicles Tesla delivered on an annual basis declined for the first time in more than a decade in 2024. Analysts estimate the EV maker delivered just shy of 1.8 million vehicles, down a little over 1% from 2023. That's despite incentives aimed at perking up sales. Shares hit the brakes to the tune of 6.1%. Electricity utility Constellation Energy heated up 8.4% after announcing more than $1 billion in contracts to supply nuclear power to federal agencies. Bonds rose, the yield on the 10-year T-note fell to 4.56%. You're listening to Marketplace.
The Numbers is supported by Odoo.com, your entire business on one platform. Marketplace is supported by Solidigm. Today's AI ambitions require a different approach to storage. Solidigm offers solid-state storage solutions optimized for AI with higher capacities, greater speed, and energy efficiency. StorageForAI.com. And by Bitwarden, with a reminder that the best way to celebrate Data Privacy Week is with a password manager trusted by millions. Bitwarden is designed to keep sensitive information private and secure across all devices and accounts. Learn more at Bitwarden.com.
At 6:44, you're listening to News 87.
Next time on Climate One. When it comes to clean energy, solar and wind tend to dominate the headlines, but another source may be heating up.
Right now, we're actually in an exciting period because I think we're undergoing a new generation, a new revolution in geothermal power technology.
Geothermal energy, the heat beneath your feet. Next on Climate One.
Sunday morning at 6, you're on News 87.
Support comes from Uptown Appliance Repair, now open and ready to service Houston's residential and commercial appliance needs while staying committed to the health and safety of the community. More at uptownappliancerepair.com.
And on the freeway, still have a stalled semi in your way. Southbound 45 at Oak Ridge and Center Lanes. Southbound 45 at the North Loop, a wreck with a car on its side, only one right lane getting through. And still have the problem on the North Sam eastbound direction, a wreck just before the connector ramps to 6986 and 645.
This is Marketplace. I'm Kristen Schwab. With the new year comes a new Congress as of tomorrow. A new Congress that will face a familiar old problem, the debt ceiling, a limit on how much money the United States can borrow, which the Treasury is close to hitting. Last time this happened in 2023, Congress decided to handle the problem by temporarily suspending the debt ceiling. The plan was to reinstate it at the beginning of this year. It means if nothing changes, the Treasury will hit the ceiling and won't be able to borrow any more money, and the country will default on its existing debt, which would be
majorities to secure their sort of policy priorities.
Every time the debt approaches the ceiling, Congress must decide whether to default, cut spending, or, and this is what frequently happens, raise the ceiling. In 2023, Congress decided to instead suspend it. That move has become much more popular in the past 15 years, says Laura Blessing of Georgetown's Government Affairs Institute.
To me, there are a number of different things that you have to argue this is a trend that include higher congressional dysfunction and higher deficits.
Blessing says Congress has tweaked the debt ceiling more than 100 times. Most likely, that'll happen again this time. Incoming President Trump has suggested abolishing the ceiling altogether. Blessing says it's not a bad idea because it isn't a useful tool for oversight.
It's a landmine planted in the calendar again.
But she also says abolishing it is unlikely because that's not popular with fiscal conservatives. Kent Spedders directs the Penn-Warren budget model at the University of Pennsylvania. He thinks the ceiling is useful
because it has led to various things like budget control acts and pay-as-you-go rules and things like that, which have curtailed some spending or tax cuts.
Spedders says the debt is on a runaway trajectory, a crisis like COVID or the Great Depression.
When the crisis is caused by debt itself, you can't issue more debt.
Spedders and Georgetown's Laura Blessing agree that whatever happens to the debt ceiling, the country's budget deficit is not sustainable. I'm Kaylee Wells for Marketplace.
sort of create almost like a marketing campaign, and then going into the more sincere
her and offered her a job right there. So it can happen. What is the likelihood? Unclear.
Danielle Abril writing about job seekers using social media in the Washington Post. Danielle, thanks again.
Thanks so much for having me.
What's in a name? Well, Shakespeare seemed to have thought names don't hold a lot of value. But try telling that to a business owner. Because behind every company or brand or product, there's a person who spent hours thinking about what to call it. In fact, there are people who do this very thing for a living. Which brings us to today's installment of our series, My Economy.
My name's Liba Golden Kulendros. I'm a professional namer, and I live in Lowell, Massachusetts. I got into this business by accident. I met up with an old friend who happened to be working at a branding firm where they had just developed the name Viagra. And I always had an inclination that I might be good at naming. I've always been a super word nerd, crossword puzzle solver, love a good pun. And I asked him to give me a try. He did. And I ended up sticking around as a contractor doing naming of pharmaceuticals for the first several years. When you get into the medical field or the pharmaceutical field, there's a lot of regulatory issues that need to be addressed and a lot of legal issues that need to be addressed. So you're often more restricted in what you can say in a name. There may be regulatory requirements that you have to encode the name of the generic into the pharmaceutical name. So I think of it as a bit of a Tetris exercise or a Rubik's Cube. You're trying to shift together all these syllables into something that's pronounceable, ownable, and able to be cleared legally. So one name I came up with for lens crafters when they were looking to update and announce their new state-of-the-art eye exam, we took a real word, clarify, and we added an E to evoke the word eye. And it's subtle, it's trustworthy because it's not totally a weird invented name full of vowels and consonants that we can't make sense of. It actually communicates meaning, but with a little twist. When I'm feeling stuck, I dig into my Latin studies. I go online and look at other brands. I may go to other countries online and look at their brands. I'm just a super word nerd, always capturing a turn of phrase that catches my eye or my ear. And I tune into how things look in branding. Because naming is only one piece of a brand, right? It's how it's shown in a logo. It's how the design looks, what the identity of the brand is. So if I stay in touch with all those innovations in branding in general, it helps me stay on top of how naming needs to work.
That's Liba Golden Kulendros, a professional namer from Lowell, Massachusetts. We can't do this series without you. Tell us what's happening in your economy at marketplace.org/myeconomy.
With small ship, river, ocean, and expedition voyages, offering cultural enrichment and immersive experiences. Discover more at Viking.com.
This final note on the way out today, read this in the New York Times. Today, China hit dozens of U.S. companies with trade controls, saying the country is safeguarding national security and interests. The list includes Boeing, Raytheon, and Lockheed Martin, all makers of defense systems. Experts say the move is mostly symbolic. And the symbolism here is that with just weeks to go before President-elect Donald Trump takes office and possibly imposes new taxes on imports, China is showing signs it's ready for battle. John Buckley, John Gordon, Noya Carr, Diantha Parker, Amanda Peacher, and Stephanie Seek are the Marketplace editing staff. Amir Babawi is the managing editor, and I'm Kristen Schwab. We'll see you tomorrow. This is APM.
It's a minute before 7 on the evening before Friday here on your NPR station, News 887.
Support comes from John Moore, helping with plumbing, electrical, and air conditioning repairs, including out-of-warranty units since 1965. Details at 730-2525 or at johnmooreservices.com.
One last look at the drive home. Southbound 45 bogged down through the Woodlands for an earlier stalled semi that took up a couple of lanes at Oak Ridge. Much farther down south, southbound 45 still have a wreck at the North Loop. At least 2 left lanes taken up there, and right after that, a stall in the left lane at Cavalcade. So don't floor it once you get past the North Loop. And North Sam eastbound, the last track still had a wreck just before the connector roads at 69 East Tex Freeway. Between now and sunrise at 7:15, we'll have a bit of patchy fog, maybe more patchy rain, and a low around 54. That's running about 10 degrees above average, and then mostly sunny throughout the day tomorrow, and a high of 67. Right now at 60 here at your NPR station, KUHF Houston News 887, a service of the University of Houston. 7 o'clock.
White and Trump both saw around the corner here about what the UFC could become in the cultural and political space that it has become. And White has really articulated his worldview quite clearly. To quote him, America has become so soft. If you have even this much savage in you, everything out there right now is for the taking.
I'm Sabrina Tavernise. That's coming up on The Daily from the New York Times. The Daily is supported by Seed. Seed's DS-01 is 24-strain 2-in-1 probiotic and prebiotic engineered to survive digestion, support healthy regularity, and promote whole body health. Learn more at SEED.com/public.
Go deeper into the day's most pressing stories with New York Times journalists, trusted sources, and the people affected. The Daily from the New York Times, distributed by American Public Media.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Jack Spear. President Biden says the man who rammed a truck into New Year's revelers in New Orleans, killing 14 people, acted alone. As of yet, investigators have found no links between that attack and the Cybertruck explosion hours later in Las Vegas. NPR's Tamara Keith reports Biden convened his Homeland Security team for an update.
Investigators initially thought that Shamsuddin Jabbar had help in executing the attack because they found improvised explosive devices in coolers elsewhere in the French Quarter. Now, President Biden confirms Jabbar had a remote detonator in the vehicle he used to target pedestrians.
We have no information that anyone else is involved in the attack. They've established that the attacker was the same person who planted the explosives in those ice coolers in 2 nearby locations.
Biden said he asked his team to accelerate their investigations to try to get answers to remaining questions. He promised to provide updates when he knows more. Tamara Keith, NPR News, the White House.
4 years after a man was caught on video placing pipe bombs outside the offices of the Democratic and Republican National Committees here in the U.S. Capitol, the FBI is releasing new information about the suspect. Investigators say they believe the individual was about 5 feet 7 inches tall. The FBI also posting previously unreleased video of the suspect near the DNC building on January 5th, 2021. That was the night before Trump supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol. The Bureau says it has not established a clear link, but hopes the new information may generate fresh leads into the case. Bombs failed to detonate. A cold front known as an Arctic outbreak is spreading through much of the U.S. as NPR's Rachel Treisman reports the central and eastern parts of the country could see their coldest air of the season.
The National Weather Service says blasts of air from Siberia have reached the northern plains and will spread east and south into next week. The cold front is likely to bring below average temperatures as far south as Florida and the Gulf Coast. Forecasters are also warning of a weekend storm that could dump heavy snow and hazardous ice from the central plains to the mid-Atlantic and northeast. They're encouraging people to stock up on 3 days' worth of provisions, insulate their pipes, monitor emergency alerts, and check in on their loved ones. Rachel Treisman, NPR News.
Everything Apple's virtual assistant Siri can be a bit too with you, granting preliminary approval for the device maker, paid $95 million in cash to settle a proposed class action lawsuit. Users had complained Apple routinely recorded their private conversations after they unintentionally activated Siri, then disclosed those conversations to third-party advertisers. Plaintiffs said their mentions of products triggered ads for those products. Class members numbering in the tens of millions could receive up to $20 per device. On Wall Street, the Dow was down 151 points. This is NPR. Israeli airstrikes are now being blamed for at least 26 deaths across Gaza. Israel says the strikes in the seaside humanitarian zone were aimed at Hamas security officers. The strikes also hit an area where thousands of displaced people have been seeking shelter from damp, wintry weather. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says his office has authorized a delegation to continue negotiations in Qatar toward reaching a ceasefire. One of President Jimmy Carter's significant pieces of legislation would have changed mental health care. Here's Katie Riddle.
President Carter and his wife Rosalind worked together to pass something called the Mental Health Systems Act in 1980. Months later, it was dismantled. Stephen Sharfstein worked on the legislation.
When it was repealed following year by then President Reagan, and let me tell you, elections matter, there was a lot of dismay among the mental health community, the patients, the various professional organizations. However, over time, particularly the next decade or so, a number of the provisions of the act were re-legislated.
Sharfstein says even though it was not realized as Carter imagined it, it set forth a vision for policymakers for decades. Katie Riddle, NPR News.
For electric vehicle maker Tesla, a rare global sales miss. While the company's seen its stock soar since the election, when CEO Elon Musk became a policy advisor to the president-elect, shares tumbled today on word that for the first time in more than a dozen years, the automaker missed global sales targets. A 1% drop from the previous year came despite incentives. I'm Jack Spear, NPR News in Washington.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the Lemelson Foundation, working to harness the power of invention and innovation to accelerate climate action and improve lives around the world. Learn at lemelson.org. This is NPR.
This is Daily Producer Olivia Nadd. I'm in Las Vegas, outside an arena where tonight there's going to be the UFC championship fight. I am notoriously squeamish, so I'm really excited to talk to people about why they like this sport, why they're here tonight, and I'm going to go talk to some of them. It is a microphone. Do you have a couple of minutes to answer some questions?
Oh, hell yeah. Yeah, let's get some questions going. Let's get some questions going.
Why are you guys here tonight? What do you like about watching fights?
The combat is, love it. Like you never know, it's two men in a cage. It's man versus man. Beast versus beast.
From the New York Times, I'm Sabrina Tavernisi, and this is The Daily.
All right, walking over to the octagon, and it sounds like the first fights have just kicked off.
Over the past 5 years, one sports league has gained popularity faster than any other. The Ultimate Fighting Championship, or UFC. Today, my colleague Matt Flegenheimer on the man behind the league and how his longtime friendship with Donald Trump has transformed what was once a fringe sport into a cultural and political powerhouse. It's Thursday, January 2nd. So Matt, we're going to talk today about UFC, but I have something to do. By all means, I've actually never watched it. So let's start with the basics, Matt. Tell us what the UFC is.
Sure. UFC stands for Ultimate Fighting Championship. It's the sort of primary promotion associated with mixed martial arts. It is a cage fighting enterprise which combines elements of kickboxing, wrestling, jiu-jitsu into this kind of very painful medley of activities in what they call the octagon, this 8 eight-sided cage where two fighters convene and beat each other up over a course of rounds. It also has been one of the fastest-growing sports. Huge audience internationally. It was acquired for $4 billion in 2016. It's only grown since, not just in the sports world, but culturally and politically as well. It really has a kind of crowning moment in November.
And what happens in November?
So, President-elect Trump, really fresh off his election win, attends a fight at Madison Square Garden in New York City. Trump is sort of waiting in the wings with his entourage and walks out almost as if he is the fighter. President and CEO of the UFC, Dana White, is to his left. Elon Musk is with him. Mike Johnson is with him. And the crowd just loses its mind.
It's always loud when he comes there, but how many won? Now that he's the president again? Oh my God.
And Trump is taking this all in. This is obviously a very friendly room for him. And he's chosen this as a major post-election victory lap space.
Yeah.
And he got the reception that he wanted. And as the video ends, you see the number 45 flash across the screen, and then it moves to 47, showing his presidency and his presidency to be.
Okay, so this is an extraordinary scene. And I want you to tell me, Matt, how he got here. Like, how did Trump choose a UFC fight for his coming out party as president-elect?
You know, I think it's actually a pretty natural choice for Trump if you think about the arc of Trump in the UFC across really 20 plus years at this point. And that arc begins with Dana White. White has been a close friend and ally of Trump's, and they've kind of risen in
Ready to roll. Get Exit right. Keep right, and then turn right. Turn right. Keep left, and then turn left. Turn left. Get ready to turn right. Turn right. Get ready to turn right. Turn right. You have arrived at your destination. Your route guidance is now finished.